Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are continuing on with The Boys, and in this one we are covering the story arc of Believe, and this is probably one of the coolest story arcs throughout the entirety of The Boys. I absolutely love this one because what this does is it kind of hits home with regards to like all the various things that Vought American does, right? So initially it picks up with Homelander basically meeting with the representative, or I guess really the guy who's running Vought American now, and ultimately it's just kind of like, okay, so like, you know, here's the agenda for everything going on with the Believe event. Now Homelander hates this, right? Like he hates the Believe event, and up to this point it really makes sense. You know, not even so far in terms of what the Believe event is about, but in the sense that Homelander just doesn't like dealing with people, right? He just doesn't really like the general public. Now, of course, once Starlight shows up, well, then it's kind of like, okay, you got to do the Believe event as well. Now, the reality behind this, in terms of really why the Believe event really exists in the first place, is that it's a Christian themed event, right? It's designed to tie into not just Homeland America, but the percentage of America's population in excess of 65% that is historically believed in Christianity. And so with that being like a huge percentage, in order to kind of satisfy that audience base and ensure that the boat doesn't get rocked too much and it can ensure those sales continue on, the Believe event is done to really basically say that like, hey, the superheroes out there, they identify with God's ideology. And of course, that really sort of rallies the Christian fan base, which in turn leads to higher sales. So at the end of the day, it's always about making money. But with Starlight, given everything that she's experienced, right, and everything that's gone down here, she doesn't really want to be a part of it. And it's kind of interesting because what she says is like, I'm not really a person who identifies with Christianity anymore. Now, in terms of whether or not that's truly the case, I would doubt it. I think it's really more the fact that her faith has been shaken because of everything that she's experienced, right? Because Starlight, when she was first brought to us in the Boys comics, was really just kind of like this wide-eyed girl from Heartland America who didn't really see the world for what it was. I'd say she's really having more of a crisis of faith and probably a full-on existential crisis because she doesn't know where she fits into all of this. And so the result of that is she basically tells the Vought American rep, I'm not doing this. But again, at the end of the day, it's yes, you are. Like, this is going to happen. This guy basically pulls the strings and he knows he has the upper hand on the superheroes. They do what they're told because if they don't, they'll lose this lifestyle, right? The money will stop flowing. And so at the end of the day, it's one of these things where it's like, well, but I have to insist though. This is not really in question. It's not really a debatable point. If anything, you telling me that you're not going to do it is just grandstanding, right? Like it's you following these higher moral principles or whatever you want to refer to it as, but like you're going to do it, right? So like, let's just stop kidding ourselves and let's do this, right? And even Queen Maeve says the same thing, right? When it's one of these things, well, you know, like is the Vought American contract under some kind of review? It's basically this guy's way of saying, if you don't do it, then we are going to pull the plug, right? But again, it's not in so many words. It's not this super heavy-handed approach. And Queen Maeve basically chimes in and says, essentially, he's going to pull the plug if you guys don't do this. So you guys are going to do it, you know? So it's like, it's one of these things where like, we know this is going to happen. And again, it's a pretty cool moment there. And so what this does is it switches over to this really sensitive moment when it comes to the Homelander, in the sense that like A-Train is just kind of making his way through the Seven's watchtower and just hears like some guy crying, right? And so like once he, you know, goes and basically tracks it down, he ends up finding Homelander just kind of sitting in this hole crying to himself. And the first thing A-Train does is bail, basically take off and act like he didn't see anything. Homelander is the most powerful of all the members of the Seven, right? And he's got a pretty short fuse. Not only that, it would be embarrassing if A-Train went running off and said, hey guys, you won't believe what I saw. Homelander was crying in this little hole because he feels like he's not in control of his own life and destiny and so on and so forth. It'd be largely humiliating, and then Homelander would probably kill A-Train, right? And so as a result, it's in A-Train's best interest to basically keep his mouth shut. And so from this point, we transition to a conversation between Huey and Annie. And this is actually a really, really cool conversation because one of the things to keep in mind here is up to this point, Annie doesn't really know the story of Robin, right? Like she doesn't really know how deep this goes with regards to Huey. Now also keep in mind, like Starlight doesn't know what Huey does, right? She doesn't know he's part of the Boys. He's basically just been telling her this entire time that like he works for an insurance company and he's basically sent all over the world and they're all sent all over to these different locations for insurance claims and different things like that and so on and so forth, which is just kind of a throwaway thing. Now, it's kind of ironic because the two of them have basically been lying to each other the entire time, right? Like Huey lies about the fact that he's working for the Boys and Annie lies about the fact that she's a superhero. And so it's kind of interesting because Annie pops up and really makes a statement. The last time you said you loved me was when we were at Penn Station. I told you I love you this morning and you never said anything back. And that's kind of a big deal. One of the things I've learned over the years is that for women, the notion of saying like, I love you is not really something that you just sort of throw away. When that stops happening, when a person stops saying, I love you, well, then it just starts sending up red flags, right? Oh my God, like this relationship's on its way out the door and all these different things, you know, and I think it's for men as well, you know, for people in general. It's one of these things where where it's like, oh God, this relationship's coming to an end. And so as a result of that, Huey really kind of jumps in real quick and says, well, it's not because I'm having second thoughts. It's because we're getting really, really serious. And the last time that I was in a relationship as serious as this, I lost the person that I loved, i.e. Robin. And that's when he basically starts spilling the beans and talking about everything that's going on with regards to the fact, where he doesn't really seem to name her directly. He goes on to basically say, like, there was this woman that I was in love with, and ultimately, she was killed by a superhero and different things like that. Essentially everything that we saw unfold at the very beginning of the story. And it's interesting because what he's doing is kind of confiding to her in a way that he hadn't really done before, right? Like letting her in to this very sensitive part of his life. Not only that, like once he starts going through and naming names, what he says is that like the person that basically killed his girlfriend was A-Train. Now, if you remember back to the very beginning of the story, it wasn't like A-Train just ran up on her and just punched her really hard or anything like that. She died as part of collateral damage. But it's a cool thing because when he basically reveals this, Annie begins to kind of have not really a moment of panic, but she gets sick because A-Train's one of the guys in the Seven that she essentially when she became an early member of the team, when she first joined up. And so with that being the case, she does the only thing that she really feels is the right thing to do, which is to spill the beans and to basically reveal the fact that she's a superhero to Huey, to basically say like, I'm an individual with superpowers. Now there is both a kind of a benefit and a drawback to this. The benefit is of course, Annie's opening up and she's telling Huey the truth. The drawback to this, and what's kind of ironic about it, is she basically tells Huey, not knowing that he's part of the boys, you don't know what these superheroes are like. You have no idea what these guys are like. Like all I ever wanted to do was be a superhero when I was a little kid. And in reality, again, that's kind of the nature of the boys' landscape, is how these kids are raised, right? Those individuals who have been exposed to Compound V and are kind of brought up with this ideology that superheroes are the greatest thing ever. It's almost like a religious cult. Believe in this thing, right? Like believe that superheroes are great, because if you do, you could be one of them too, that kind of a thing. And so it's always been a core part of her life. The result of this is that once she actually got into it, as we said before, it proved to be totally different. The problem is that while she's going through all this and she's talking about her experiences with superheroes, and while she doesn't really name names as far as to say like Homelander's done this, Queen Maeve has done that, A-Train's done this, the Deep has done that, while she doesn't really go as far as to really run these things out and talk about these various things, what Huey's picturing in his mind is all the horrible things that he's seen with the superhero community. And ultimately it kind of bookends with this idea that the purpose of the boys is to either challenge these superheroes, or if it comes down to a knockdown drag out fight, to kill them. And given the fact that he's killed various superheroes out there, the possibility exists, even if Huey's not really willing to recognize it, that things could pop off and he may end up having to fight Annie. And so in this moment of panic, he runs. He basically bails out. And so then you kind of get this little bit of a funny moment here, right? Where you've got the female who's hanging out with the Frenchie when they're at the Believe event, and they're really just there as spies, right? To kind of keep an eye on things and to see if they can somehow, overhear a meeting of the various superheroes who were there, get some tidbit or factoid of information. And as the female's walking around, some kid just like snatches up her sucker, right? Because this kid's being raised by an absentee mom. And as a result of this, the female has like this vision where she goes on a warpath, right? Like tears the face off this kid, so she helps him to understand his place in the bigger picture, and then just goes on a warpath, destroys the whole city of New York, and is sitting on like this pile of bones, and it's kind of hilarious because it's like, this kid stole my sucker, now everyone's gonna die. Which of course is funny, because which one of us have not experienced that moment, right? Like you're walking along and then you drop your ice cream cone and you're like, everyone's gonna die. Just experience this extreme rage, or something like that. It's one of these funny little moments. And so because that, Frenchie's like, okay, so like you need to back off. So he buys all the balloons at the Believe event and then puts the female in them to keep her in disguise, to keep her hidden. And then of course this kind of sends her floating along and then carries her along the way. And so what this does is this jumps over to basically the sidekick 12 and Oh Father. Now of course, again, this is not like some group that exists out there and Oh Father's just kind of like, hey, like, we're like a religious superhero team. They are, but again, they're Vought American guys. But something that I want you to notice here is that when it comes to Oh Father, he's very much aware of everything that goes on, but it's kind of ironic, right? Because with almost any kind of religious system, the religion is where the money is. And so that's when it comes to that, when it comes to the character of Oh Father, he's kind of got the perfect gig. So long as he keeps people believing in the correlation between superheroes and God, then like the religious money keeps flowing, and then in turn, Vought American keeps making that money, right? So at the end of the day, like when he's talking to Homelander, it's just kind of like, yeah, man, like Homelander asked the question, like, do you really believe, like, how do you feel about this whole thing with Vought American trying to position superheroes, in a spot where they can basically go on and be part of the defense system of the United States? And the response of Oh Father is like, you really believe that's gonna like, that's not gonna happen. That's never gonna happen, right? Like that's like literally like Vought American backed the wrong horse, right? Like appointing a goofball like Vic the Veep to be the one to carry out their goals and so on and so forth. They backed the wrong candidate, they backed the wrong horse. Vought American's going about it all the wrong way. This basically shows that Oh Father is just kind of like, I just do my job, right? Like that's really what it is, right? He's a guy that just clocks in at at 8 a.m., clocks out at 4:30 p.m., and he's done. And that's basically it, right? Like his day is over. And that's essentially it. He doesn't really care about the politics of it all. He doesn't really care about Vought American. He just collects his check and goes home and plays his part just like everybody else. And it's kind of interesting. It's kind of hard to explain, in terms of how that feels in comparison to everything else. And maybe it's just the differences between the two. The differences between Homelander insofar as he's up there in the ivory tower as part of the Seven, and then you've got, Oh Father, who's down there on the ground with the various superheroes. Now, it's also kind of ironic too, because given his ties to Vought American, and given how Believe is kind of this centric event that takes place every year with regards to Christianity and superheroes, that Oh Father really kind of doesn't really have his hands in everything so much as he knows everybody. And that's really what Homelander asks, like if an event, quote unquote, were to take place that would force the hand of the government to basically side with us, right? Like if things popped off more or less, how many people do you think we'd be able to get to our side? And it's kind of one of these things where it's like, are you talking about the idea of like rising up against the government or against the people? Or like, what is this, right? Because Homelander's being very, very cloak and dagger, right? He's not really spilling the beans here. And so, Oh Father kind of picking up on what Homelander's laying down is like, well, I don't know, maybe like 60 or 65%. And from Homelander, it's like, those odds are good enough. So what he basically says is like, bring everybody together. Once this whole Believe event is done, gather all the people that you think will be on our side and bring them together, right? Like bring them to our cause and we can go from there. The other part of this is that once Annie actually gets up on stage and starts talking and really kind of espouses this ideology that like God is the only way, and almost kind of like this intolerance. Anything that's not a belief in God is inherently wrong. This sort of intolerant perspective begins to really kind of draw the attention of Oh Father and Homelander insofar as Oh Father asks, like, what's the deal with this chick? Like, what's going on with her? And Homelander's like, well, she's a believer. She believes in the idea of superheroes and she believes in goodness and all that kind of good, all that kind of stuff. Like, she's really just wide-eyed and really kind of naive in a lot of different ways. At least she was. Of course, she's gained a lot of experience from everything that's going on here, but it's kind of interesting because one of the things they kind of agree on is she can't really be trusted, right? Like Starlight can't really be trusted as a person who would rally to the side of the superhero community because she doesn't want to be part of the superhero community. And this really sort of hits home when you have her talking directly to Homelander. And it's kind of interesting because they sort of share this moment of solidarity, right? Like this moment of her basically confiding in him. And their common ground, of course, is in their disdain for Vought American, right? Because Vought American is the one who pulls the strings and the superheroes aren't really in control of their own lives. And it's kind of crazy because when that goes on, it's just kind of like Homelander saying like, I can appreciate the way that you stood up to Vought American. And Starlight's like, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter because it ended, it resulted in me being here. But Homelander's like, that's not the point. The point isn't whether or not you had to do it. The point is that you basically showed Vought American, we're not here to do everything that you tell us to. We can say no sometimes. And that's kind of a funny thing there because the reality of these superheroes, given the power that they have, is that if they chose to conquer the United States, who's going to stop them, right? Like the military's not going to be able to stop them. Vought American can't stop them, right? Like nobody could stop them. They stop themselves. And that's basically it. But it's kind of funny because then Starlight basically says, well, I'm considering giving up on the Seven and basically quitting the superhero team and going about and doing my own thing. And then Homelander snaps back to being the dick that we all know he is. And he says, well, like, you're going to do that after all the hard work you put in getting onto the team in the first place? Which is kind of like, well, screw you then if that's how you're going to be. Which is kind of like, well, then you if that's how you're going to be. And she basically just storms off and leaves. And so it's just kind of like, well, damn, like, this guy's a dick. And so following that, what you basically get is this sort of coming together between Huey and Billy Butcher in a way that wasn't really there before, right? Because Huey basically goes through and just starts spilling the beans to Billy Butcher and saying like, here's everything that's going on with me and Annie, like with me and Starlight. And it's one of these things where Billy Butcher kind of seems to have a lot of the answers or seems to know what's going on, but doesn't have all the details. And Huey opening up is really designed to say, hey, look, if I'm going to be part of the boys, then I'm going to tell you everything that's going on, right? To kind of try to build this trust between the two of us or something along those lines. And of course he goes through and starts saying like, this is how long we've been together and this is how we met and all that kind of stuff. So basically everything that we've seen in the story so far. But then Billy Butcher in turn, where Huey kind of has this moment where he believes that Billy doesn't trust him anymore, then Billy basically says, no, here's what's going on, right? Like here's my end of the bargain, right? Like here's me basically telling you what you didn't know before. And what he says is that when the question was kind of asked in the beginning, how do we have all this secret information and all this stuff on all these various superheroes? How are we able to monitor the Seven the way that we are? Billy Butcher's like, it's Queen Maeve. Queen Maeve is the spy that we have inside the Seven, which is a massive revelation because then the question is like, how did they manage to get their hands on Queen Maeve? And so what we end up learning is that at some point in the past, when Queen Maeve first joined the team, she basically kind of defected to a degree. And the reason why was because if you guys remember, the Legend was an employee of Vought American insofar as he basically worked for Victory Comics, worked for the direct arm, and then eventually basically parted ways with Vought American and became an information broker of sorts, working directly with the boys themselves after becoming, more or less an enemy of Vought American proper. And so because of that, Queen Maeve, having had a close tie to the Legend when he worked at Vought American as somebody she could confide in, basically came out and said, I want to see the Seven taken down. It wasn't done in so many words, right? It wasn't like she showed up with a bullhorn and was like, I want to kill Homelander Homelander and the Deep and A-Train, all these guys. You know, it wasn't really anything like that. It was like just kind of looking at her, it was, okay, she wants these guys to suffer. But the real question wasn't really answered in terms of why. What happened that led her to want to take these guys out? And so as time progressed and as time began to pass, Billy Butcher, using his contacts, using his information that was given to him by the Legend, information given to him by Mallory, basically reveals that like at some point along the line, Queen Maeve ended up having sex, which we kind of knew, but basically these sexual escapades were captured in the form of photographs and then were like dispersed out for the guys of Vought American to see. And so because of that, she felt humiliated and felt embarrassed and wanted to enact her revenge accordingly. And so what ends up going on here is Billy Butcher basically sits Huey down and says, okay man, like I'm gonna go get some Chinese food, continue what you were doing, monitoring the tape, see if we can find any information or anything like that. And it's not really an innocuous thing, right? Like it's a nefarious thing, because what Billy had done is he had sat Huey down to basically monitor the tape without Huey really knowing it at the time, to watch the tape where Starlight basically ends up giving to the guys that she gave him to when she first joined the Seven. And Huey, watching all this go down, is absolutely destroyed, because as soon as that happens, of course, you know, Billy Butcher comes back from getting Chinese, and it's just, you know, where Huey asks, have you seen that? Billy Butcher's like, yeah, I basically have. Now understand, it's not Billy Butcher doing it for the sake of just being mean. It's Billy Butcher doing it for the sake of showing Huey the kind of person that he's dealing with, or at least the kind of person Billy Butcher thinks Huey's dealing with. Because remember, from Billy Butcher's perspective, superheroes cannot be trusted. They cannot be trusted, and they should not be trusted ever. They're inherently bad people. Even if they started out good, they always end up becoming bad. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the stance of Billy Butcher with regards to the superhero community in the Boys comics. And so what he says is like, the reality of this is, have you ever considered that she's just laughing at you? Under what circumstance would she have ever gotten with you previously? She's getting with you because one, either she doesn't believe she has any other opportunities, or two, she's damaged goods. She's screwed up. If she was a healthy, functioning, normal human being, she would never be with you. And so it's just kind of like, that's kind of screwed up, man. Like that's kind of a dick thing to say, right? But at the same time, it's basically Billy Butcher's perspective. He's not coming from a place of vindictiveness. It's what he genuinely believes. And so it's like, once she basically got up to the Seven, once she started doing her own thing, that, you know, her being screwed up is just kind of looking at a guy like you and just saying, well, you're just there, right? So her being with you is just satisfying some itch she needs to scratch. But that's basically it. Like, you're not really anything to her, and don't let yourself believe that you are. And so this really hits Huey home. Now the reality is, it hits Huey hard because he's in a vulnerable position. And that's where things like that come into play, right? Is using that kind of line of logic, using that sort of distorted logic, and then using it on a person in a vulnerable position. Of course it's going to affect him. In any normal circumstance, he wouldn't really believe it, or he may incorporate it and then not necessarily run with it and apply it to everything else and then draw his own conclusions. But being in this emotionally crushed state, everything impacts him psychologically. And so because of that, Huey basically ends up running off to cry, and then when he comes back, you know, he's basically like, okay, I'm gonna go take off for a minute. Now of course, Billy Butcher knows that Huey's gonna go confront Annie about it. Like, he knows he's gonna go confront Starlight about it. So what he tells him is, don't tell her how it was that we saw this. If Huey goes and confronts her about it and just starts popping off at the mouth, and then in turn Starlight gets angry, well then the question becomes, how in the world did they know that this was going on? Then it raises the question of, are they watching us? And if they are watching us, then one, where are these cameras? Two, who planted them there? And three, how much do they know, right? So basically it would blow open the Boys' ability to monitor the Seven, because it would essentially destroy their intelligence gathering as it exists up to this point. It would ruin pretty much everything. And so as a result of that, you end up kind of jumping back to the end of the Believe event. And at the end of this event, it was basically this idea that there was going to be a raffle, and those individuals who won, or at least the particular family who won, would get dinner with Homelander. And so of course the family who won is the Mueller family from Larchmont, New York. I think is how you pronounce that. And so it's kind of like, yay, you know, these guys win. It's like, you know, hey everybody, thanks for coming out. This was an awesome Believe event, you know, thanks for being part of this. And so basically, like, you know, as they begin to take off, Frenchie begins to have this realization of what's going on here, that it's like yes, they're all leaving, like yes, they're all flying into the air, but Homelander keeps flying higher and higher. That the reality is that Homelander should be flying to a particular direction. Given that he's flying a car, these are people who are not acclimated for like superhero antics, you know, that their bodies aren't super durable. They're like flying them directly up into the sky like that. Homelander is going to do something. And so what you do is you jump directly back to Huey and Annie, and everything pops off. The first thing he does is call her a and then after that just starts laying into her. And all he's doing is taking everything that Billy Butcher told him, combining it with all these negative emotions and pouring it out directly on Annie. There's not really 1 ounce of rational thought that's coming out of Huey at the moment. It's just anger and hurt. That's really all it is. Because what he does is he looks at her and says, like, he thinks about what Billy Butcher says, and that she never would have had anything to do with him under any normal circumstance, that all he's experienced is heartbreak and suffering. And he's like, yeah, like, you are screwed up. You are damaged goods. Like, you're a messed up person. All you've been doing is laughing at me behind behind my back. I don't matter to you. Like, I'm not relevant to you. And where Annie tries to stop and explain and say, look, it's not like that. It happened before we met. And where she is right insofar as, like, one, it did happen before they met, and two, like, it's something that she's been struggling with. The other part of the reality here is it's a choice that Annie made. She could either engage in some lewd sexual activities and achieve her dream, or she could just go back to not engaging in those lewd activities. And when that moral question was presented to her, she chose to basically take the path of engaging in lewd sexual activities. She made that choice. And so because she made that choice, what it does is it reflects what really matters most to her moral viewpoints or being a superhero. And she chose to be a superhero. Her moral viewpoints didn't really seem to matter. And so because of that, it really does shine her in a negative light. And Huey, recognizing that, seeing how that tape unfolded, looks at her and really kind of, again, builds on what Billy Butcher says, or sort of recalls what Billy Butcher said. She's nothing like what he thought she was. She's a totally different person. Now, that's where Huey's wrong, right? Because Huey, like the person that he spent his time with, is a true person. The reality is that when it comes to any kind of relationship, yes, you have the honeymoon phase. Yes, you have that phase where there's the person as they appear to be. And then as that honeymoon phase begins to go away, the person as they really are begins to manifest. It begins to show up, and you see them for the kind of person they are. The test of any real relationship, of any tried and true relationship that's designed to last any real measure of time, is once you move away from the illusion of who you think a person is, and you look at them for who they truly are you still in love with them, then the relationship is solid and strong. But if after that illusion basically begins, after it's removed, and you look at that person for who they are, and you don't feel like you're in love with them anymore, then you were in love with the idea of them. That's the truth of it. And when Huey looks at that and says, like, yes, like when he previously looked at that and said, I look at her for who she was, with her being a superhero, that doesn't really change anything. This, in Huey's mind, changes everything. Because what it says is the secret she was hiding wasn't just that she was a superhero. The secret she's hiding is that she doesn't, like, her moral compass doesn't really matter. It's not really relevant. And so it's just pain and suffering and hurt. And so because of that, he basically kind of cusses her out and then ends the relationship and walks off. Basically says, like, we're not together anymore. Like, we're done here. Now, the reality, and one of the funny things about this, is Huey sort of muses to himself and is like, yes, he knows he's making the wrong choice, right? He knows he's making the wrong decision here. And so because of that, he just kind of continues on. He sticks to his guns and keeps on leaving, and leaves Starlight in this emotionally crushed position, which is ultimately, I imagine, going to turn into rage. Not only that, what you do is you jump back to Homelander, and Homelander basically flying the Mueller family through the sky, where they're like screaming, they're like, please, like, take us back down to the ground. Like, we appreciate the sightseeing tour, but like, we're freezing up here and all that kind of stuff. Homelander's just kind of like, everything that you know about Believe is utter nonsense. Everything you know about superheroes is utter nonsense. None of this stuff is real. None of this stuff is what you think it is. You have this perception of superheroes that we do great things and we act in accordance and then all this kind of these superhero antics and so on and so forth, but none of it's real, right? It's all a bunch of bullshit. That's really all it is. It's designed to make money, and it's designed to scam idiots like you out of your money. And you're stupid enough to fall for it because you're not really reading between the lines. You're just kind of going with the world the way you would hope it would be, not the way that it really is. And so what he does is he says, if you're looking to the sky for a God up there listening, there isn't one. The only man in the sky is me. And he basically drops the car, like literally just drops the family to their deaths. And where all the other superheroes who are following him basically show up and they follow suit. Then he says, let's talk. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace. We've got some new patrons in our top tiers over on patreon.com/comicsexplained. I want to give a shout out to Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, Philip, and Austin B, as well as Steven Z, Eagle F, Joey M, and Jeff R, as well as Genosis 916. As always, we just usually keep the last name to an initial. It helps you guys to maintain your anonymity. Some of you guys have expressed concern about having like your first and last name thrown out there for the world to see. I do not blame you. For you guys who have joined up as part of our Patreon tiers that are eligible for Rob Corps Honor Guard rings, those whose rings have been sent out, you should already have them. If you're a new person who just joined up and you've been part of this tier for a month, your ring will be mailed out to you. So I want to say thank you guys for being patrons.